Behind every smile, behind every perfect life, sometimes lies a story so dark that it can destroy everything we thought we knew. This is not just the story of a disappearance, it is the story of a young woman whose dreams ended too soon, and the shocking betrayal that revealed itself when the mask of love was ripped away. It was a late evening in the quiet city of Crestwood, a place where neighbors greeted one another and doors were left unlocked because crime was considered a distant problem. But that illusion was shattered when 23-year-old Maya Verma, a young model filled with ambition, failed to return home. She had promised her aunt she would meet a friend for coffee and be back by nightfall. Hours passed, midnight came, and still no word from Maya. Her phone went unanswered, her social media fell silent, and her family's panic grew with every ticking hour. At first, they thought it might be a misunderstanding, but when dawn arrived and Maya was still missing, dread began to settle in. By the second day, her relatives reached the local police, and within hours, the case shifted from a routine missing person report to something far more sinister. Maya's car was discovered abandoned along a lonely stretch of highway. Inside were her purse, her phone, and her house keys. Things no woman would ever leave behind. For Inspector Samir Jatavan, head of the crime branch team assigned to the case, the scene was chilling. The abandoned car was not a sign of someone leaving by choice. This was evidence of foul play. The police secured the car and sent it for forensic testing. Fingerprints, hair strands, tire marks, everything was carefully collected. But what gripped them most was the eerie silence. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle inside the car. It was as if Maya had simply vanished into thin air. The community erupted in fear. Friends flooded social media with desperate posts. Strangers held candlelight vigils. News anchors reported the story with urgency, branding Maya the rising star stolen too soon. But as emotional as the public became, investigators remained grounded in one chilling truth. In most disappearances like this, the culprit is rarely a stranger. The danger usually comes from someone the victim already knew, someone they trusted. And that suspicion only grew stronger when Maya's aunt revealed something crucial. Maya had been involved with a man named Arjun Sheikh, a man she had grown increasingly secretive about. Neighbors whispered about fights. Relatives recalled nights when Maya would return home in tears. And one thing became clear to police. Arjun was not just a part of Maya's life. He might be the key to her death. And then, just when the investigation seemed to stall, a call came in that changed everything. A body had been discovered. The police rushed to the scene, and what they found would ignite a chain of revelations, lies, and confessions that no one was prepared for. The phone rang just as Inspector Samir Jatavan was reviewing the missing persons report once again. On the other end of the line was a constable from the Highway Patrol, his voice urgent. A body had been found lying near the scrubland just off the old bypass road. The location was less than 2 miles from where Maya's abandoned car had been discovered the day before. Within minutes, the inspector and his team rushed to the site. The morning sun cast a pale light over the scene, the air heavy with dread. As officers cordoned off the area, villagers who had stumbled upon the body stood at a distance, whispering nervously. When the sheet was pulled back, the confirmation hit like a hammer. It was Maya Verma. Her once vibrant face now pale and lifeless, her dreams and ambitions silenced forever. The young model who had been celebrated on social media was now another tragic victim on a deserted highway. Her aunt arrived moments later, collapsing into tears, her voice breaking as she cried Maya's name. For the investigators, the grief was gut-wrenching, but they had to remain focused. This was now officially a murder case. The first priority was evidence. Gloves on, cameras flashing, every detail was documented. The body showed clear signs of assault. Bruises around the arms suggested she had been restrained. Scratches along her wrists indicated a desperate struggle. And then there was the strangulation mark, a thin, dark line circling her throat. But what caught Inspector Jatavan's attention most was the absence of personal items. Her jewelry was missing, and her phone, which had been found in her car earlier, was nowhere near the body. Whoever had done this had planned to confuse the trail, scattering evidence in separate places. The post-mortem, conducted later that day, confirmed their fears. Maya's time of death was estimated to be the very night she disappeared. Cause of death? Manual strangulation. She had fought back fiercely, but her attacker had overpowered her. At the police station, the pressure mounted. Journalists swarmed outside demanding updates. Social media campaigns exploded demanding swift justice. The inspector knew all eyes were on him. The first logical step was to trace Maya's last movements. Phone records became the foundation of their work. Investigators noticed that in the hours before her disappearance, Maya had exchanged multiple calls with one person, Arjun Sheikh. The name immediately raised alarms. He was Maya's secret boyfriend, someone she had mentioned only vaguely to her family, often in hushed tones. Neighbors recalled arguments, shouting matches, and instances where Maya had looked visibly upset after meeting him. Could Arjun have been the last person to see her alive? The cyber cell was activated, working tirelessly through hours of CCTV footage collected from the stretch of road and nearby businesses. Days of combing finally yielded a breakthrough. At a hotel called Darrera Inn, security cameras caught Maya and Arjun entering together late in the evening, just hours before she vanished. Maya appeared calm, her phone in hand. Arjun, however, looked restless, scanning the lobby, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. They signed in under false names, but their faces were clear as daylight. This was the strongest lead yet. Not only had they been together, but Arjun was likely the last person to see her alive. Investigators questioned hotel staff. A cleaner, hesitant but firm, recalled hearing a heated argument from their room. The voices carried through the thin walls. The woman's voice was sharp, almost pleading, while the man's tone was angry, louder, almost threatening. The quarrel went on for a half hour before abruptly stopping. What happened inside that room? Nobody knew. But the timing was too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Back at home, Maya's aunt gave her testimony, her eyes swollen from grief. She admitted she had been worried about Maya's relationship with Arjun for months. Maya had grown distant, avoiding questions, often staying out late without explanation. Whenever the aunt asked, Maya brushed it off with vague reassurances. But one thing stood out. Maya had recently confided to a close cousin that she was considering ending the relationship. "He is not who I thought he was. I feel trapped," she had said. For investigators, this was the missing piece of motive. A young man obsessed, unwilling to let go, and faced with rejection. Was Arjun's ego so fragile that Maya's decision to leave him pushed him into a deadly rage? The search for Arjun intensified. Calls to his phone were unanswered. His known hangouts were checked, but he was nowhere to be found. This was not the behavior of an innocent man. This was someone who knew the police were closing in. The team dug into his background. His father had once been implicated in petty crimes. Arjun himself had no stable income, but flaunted a lifestyle that raised eyebrows. Rented luxury cars, expensive clothes, nights in posh hotels. Where was the money coming from? Some officers speculated he was being bankrolled by shady dealings. This picture painted Arjun not as a grieving boyfriend, but as a volatile young man with secrets of his own. Days turned into sleepless nights for the investigators, until one night a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source: social media. Scrolling through Instagram, a junior officer stumbled upon a recent group photo from a hookah lounge downtown. In the blurred background, partially obscured by smoke, sat a familiar face. It was Arjun Sheikh. Inspector Jadhawan wasted no time. A rapid response team was assembled. Plainclothes officers surrounded the lounge, waiting for Arjun to step outside. At midnight, when he finally exited, they pounced. Arjun tried to flee, darting down a side alley, but fate was not on his side. He tripped over uneven pavement, crashing to the ground. Within seconds, officers had him in handcuffs. At the police station, Arjun put on the mask of an innocent man. He denied everything, claiming he had no idea what happened to Maya. But the evidence was already stacking up against him. CCTV, witnesses, and phone records all pointed to his involvement. And then came the moment investigators had been waiting for, the interrogation, where Arjun's mask would finally begin to crack. The interrogation room was cold, its walls bare except for a single clock that ticked loudly, amplifying the tension inside. Arjun Sheikh sat hunched in the steel chair, his hands cuffed to the table. His face was expressionless, but his restless fingers betrayed the storm brewing within. Inspector Samir Jathavan entered slowly, files tucked under his arm. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he sat across from Arjun, opened the folder, and spread out photographs of Maya, smiling in one, lying lifeless in another. "Arjun," the inspector began, softly, his tone deceptively calm. "You and I both know why you're here. The question is, do you want to tell your side of the story, or should I just rely on the evidence?" Arjun smirked, shaking his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maya was my girlfriend. I loved her. If something happened to her, I had nothing to do with it." The inspector leaned forward. "Loved her? Then why were you caught on CCTV with her at the Rara Inn? Why did witnesses hear you both fighting in the room? Why did you disappear the very night she died?" Arjun's smirk faded. His eyes darted to the photos on the table. "Couples fight. That doesn't mean I killed her." For hours, the officers circled him with questions. At first, he deflected, playing the role of the wronged lover. But Inspector Jathavan had seen this many times before. Innocent men don't run. Innocent men don't hide. And innocent men certainly don't lie about using fake names in hotel registers. The inspector slid another photo across the table. It was of Maya's bruised wrists. "Explain this, Arjun. Explain why she was restrained. Explain why she fought back." Arjun swallowed hard. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. His facade was crumbling. I didn't mean for it to happen," he muttered, finally, his voice barely audible. The room went silent. The officers leaned closer. This was the first crack in the wall. Arjun's words spilled slowly, like poison dripping from a wound. He admitted that he and Maya had argued at the hotel. She had told him she wanted to end the relationship. She said he was too controlling, too jealous, and she couldn't live in fear anymore. "I begged her not to leave me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I told her I'd change, but she wouldn't listen. She said she was done." The inspector's gaze hardened. "And so you killed her?" Arjun shook his head violently. "No, I didn't plan to kill her. I lost control. She tried to leave the room. I grabbed her. She fought back. She scratched me, screamed at me. I snapped." The officers exchanged glances. This was no longer speculation. This was a confession. But something didn't sit right with Inspector Jathavan. If Arjun had killed Maya in the hotel room, why was her body found miles away on the bypass road? And where were the missing items, her jewelry, her phone, her bag? "Arjun," Inspector Jathavan pressed, "after you strangled Maya, what did you do?" Arjun's breathing quickened. "I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I called a friend. He helped me move her body. He said we couldn't leave her in the hotel. He drove us out to the bypass. We dumped her there." The inspector's eyes narrowed. A friend? This was new. What's his name? Arjun hesitated, staring at the table as if weighing his options. Finally, he whispered, Rizwan Malik. Rizwan Malik, a name known to local law enforcement. He was a small-time hustler, often seen in shady bars and rumored to be connected to illegal betting rackets. Not a violent criminal, but not the type to shy away from trouble either. According to Arjun, Rizwan had been the one to advise him on how to cover his tracks. He had insisted they take Maya's jewelry and bag to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He had even suggested discarding her phone separately to confuse investigators. Inspector Jatavan felt a surge of anger. Maya's death wasn't just the result of one man's rage. It was compounded by the cold, calculated efforts of another man who helped erase the evidence. The interrogation shifted. While Arjun was processed for murder, the task force now pivoted to locating Rizwan Malik. Surveillance was set up around his known hangouts. Informants were paid to gather intel. Within 48 hours, they had a lead. Rizwan was hiding out in a dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city, reportedly preparing to flee. When the raid team arrived, Rizwan tried to escape through the back alley, but he was cornered quickly. Unlike Arjun, he didn't resist much. Instead, he kept repeating, "I didn't kill her. I just helped." In custody, Rizwan gave his version. He claimed Arjun had called him in a panic, saying Maya had died accidentally during a fight. Fearing for his friend, Rizwan agreed to help. He admitted to moving the body, staging the robbery, and discarding the evidence. But he insisted he never touched Maya, never laid a hand on her. "I only helped because I didn't want him to go to jail," he said nervously. The inspector knew this didn't absolve him. Under the law, aiding in the disposal of a body and tampering with evidence was a serious crime. Rizwan's hands might not have strangled Maya, but his actions had delayed justice and added to the family's suffering. Back at Maya's home, news of the confessions reached her aunt. She broke down, crying uncontrollably. For her, it wasn't just about justice, it was about betrayal. Maya had trusted Arjun. She had believed in his love. And yet the very man who promised to protect her had taken her life. The community, too, was shaken. Parents warned their daughters to be careful whom they trusted. Social media buzzed with outrage, calling for the harshest punishment. The story had become a symbol of how obsession and toxic relationships could turn deadly. But Inspector Jatavan wasn't satisfied. Something about Arjun's confession gnawed at him. The scratches on Maya's body, the bruises, the way the crime scene was staged, it all felt too clean, too planned for a moment of losing control. Was Arjun hiding more? Could there be a bigger conspiracy behind Maya's murder? The inspector knew this case wasn't over. The deeper they dug, the more twisted the truth seemed to become. The late evening silence in the police station was broken only by the scratching of pens on paper and the faint buzz of the ceiling fan. Inspector Samir Jatavan sat at his desk, staring at the confession transcripts. Something felt wrong. Arjun's story painted a picture of sudden rage, but the evidence suggested something far more deliberate. Maya's injuries, the carefully chosen dumping site, even the missing belongings, they didn't align with an act of uncontrollable anger. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. If Arjun truly lost control, why would he stage a robbery? Why involve Rizwan at all? That kind of planning didn't belong to someone in a blind fury. It hinted at something else, premeditation. The inspector pulled out the forensic reports once more. The pathologist had noted bruises not just on Maya's wrists, but faint marks across her arms and back, consistent with prolonged restraint. That wasn't the work of a man snapping in the heat of the moment. That was the work of someone who wanted to dominate, to control, and perhaps to punish. The next morning, Samir summoned Arjun for another round of questioning. This time, his approach was different. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't confront. Instead, he simply laid out the evidence one by one. Photos of the bruises, the missing items, the timeline. And then he said quietly, "Arjun, this wasn't an accident, was it? You didn't just lose control. You planned this." Arjun's eyes flickered with panic. He shifted in his chair, breathing faster. "No, it wasn't like that," he stammered. But the inspector didn't stop. He pressed harder, painting the picture in vivid detail. How Arjun lured Maya to the hotel, how he restrained her, how he made sure she couldn't escape, and how he already had Rizwan ready to cover his tracks. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Arjun whispered, "She betrayed me. She was seeing someone else. I couldn't let her go. If I couldn't have her, no one could." The confession hit like a thunderclap. The motive was clear now. This wasn't just jealousy. It was possession, twisted into obsession. Arjun hadn't killed Maya in a moment of passion. He had planned it, knowing exactly what he would do if she tried to leave. But another question still lingered. Who was this other man Arjun mentioned? And was he real, or just another lie to justify the unforgivable? Inspector Jathavan instructed his team to dig deeper into Maya's phone records, her social media accounts, her recent messages. Within hours, they found exchanges with a colleague from her office, friendly, maybe even flirtatious, but nothing concrete enough to suggest betrayal. It was enough, however, to fuel Arjun's paranoia. Meanwhile, Rizwan stuck firmly to his version. "I didn't know he planned to kill her," he repeated. "I only helped afterward." But even Rizwan's story was beginning to crack. A witness came forward, the hotel receptionist, claiming he saw Arjun and Rizwan arrive together that night, not separately as they had claimed. If true, it meant Rizwan was not just an accessory after the fact. He was there from the beginning. The case was shifting yet again. The lines between killer and accomplice were blurring. Was Rizwan more deeply involved than he admitted? Did he help restrain Maya? Did he know what was going to happen all along? The inspector now faced a puzzle with jagged pieces that refused to fit. One thing, however, was certain. Maya's death wasn't the result of a single man's weakness. It was the culmination of a dark pact between two men, one driven by obsession, the other by loyalty or greed. As Samir stared at the evidence board, the clock ticking into the dead of night, he realized the truth might be far darker than anyone had imagined. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious neighbors, and grieving relatives when the trial finally began. The air inside felt heavy, charged with a mix of sorrow and anticipation. Everyone wanted to see how justice would play out in the case that had shaken Crestwood to its core. Inspector Samir Jathavan sat quietly in the witness area, his mind replaying every detail of the investigation. He had followed the threads, pulled apart lies, and now it was time to see whether the truth would hold under the weight of the law. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the evidence in a methodical order. The bruises that suggested restraint, the staged robbery, the confession where Arjun admitted he couldn't let Maya go, and finally the testimony of the hotel receptionist who saw Arjun and Rizwan together. It painted a clear picture of premeditated murder and collusion. Arjun sat in the defendant's chair, dressed neatly in a plain shirt, his face unreadable. But every so often, he would glance toward the gallery, where Maya's aunt sat weeping silently, her handkerchief clutched tight. Rizwan, seated separately, avoided eye contact with both Arjun and the audience. His lawyer argued that Rizwan was a victim of circumstance, dragged into a mess he never intended to be part of. My client panicked. He was manipulated, forced to help out of fear, the lawyer insisted. But the prosecution had a weapon. They produced the receptionist who stood firm under questioning. "I saw them arrive together," he said. "It was late, but I'm sure. They walked in together and booked the room in Arjun's name. Rizwan carried a bag." The ripple through the courtroom was immediate. If Rizwan carried a bag, what was inside? Was it rope? Was it something used to restrain Maya? The implication was chilling. Arjun's lawyer tried to shift the narrative, painting Maya as unfaithful, suggesting that her betrayal had driven Arjun into a spiral. He is not a cold-blooded killer. He is a man broken by love, blinded by pain. This was a tragic mistake, not a calculated crime. But the prosecutor countered sharply. Mistakes don't involve prearranged accomplices. Mistakes don't involve stolen belongings and staged robberies. This wasn't love. This was control, obsession, and murder. The courtroom drama intensified when phone records were presented. They showed not just Maya's messages with her colleague, but calls between Arjun and Rizwan on the very night Maya disappeared. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the hotel check-in. It was damning. Arjun's defense began to crumble. His own lawyer, under pressure, shifted strategy, trying to separate his client from Arjun entirely. Yes, he was there. Yes, he helped. But he never intended harm. He was trapped in a situation beyond his control. But intent mattered little when the evidence showed cooperation. Inspector Samir Jatawan was finally called to the stand. He walked steadily, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. His testimony was calm but precise. He explained the evidence, the timeline, the inconsistencies in Arjun's story, and the crucial role Rizwan played. He spoke not with emotion, but with authority, and the jury listened carefully. When cross-examined, Arjun's lawyer tried to rattle him. "Inspector Jatawan, isn't it true that your investigation relied heavily on circumstantial evidence?" Samir leaned forward, his voice firm. "Circumstantial evidence may not scream, but when it whispers the same truth over and over again, you cannot ignore it. All the whispers here point to the same conclusion. Arjun Sheikh and Rizwan Khan planned and executed the murder of Maya Verma." The courtroom fell silent. Outside, the media spun every moment into headlines. Millionaire's son accused of cold-blooded murder. The betrayal that shocked Crestwood. Was it love or obsession? The public was divided, but the evidence was stacking high. And yet, as the trial dragged on, new whispers began to emerge. Whispers that someone else may have known what was happening that night. Someone who had not yet stepped into the light.
The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the prosecution wrapped up their evidence. It seemed like the case was leaning heavily against Arjun or Rizwan, but then something unexpected happened. A new name entered the proceedings, someone no one had anticipated. The judge called for order as the prosecutor announced a surprise witness. "Your Honor, the state would like to call Priya Sharma to the stand." A ripple of surprise swept through the audience. Priya was Maya's close friend, someone who had remained mostly silent throughout the investigation. She had attended vigils, posted supportive messages online, but had never stepped into the spotlight until now. As Priya walked to the witness stand, Arjun's calm facade cracked. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched under the table. Inspector Samir noticed it immediately. The reaction spoke volumes. Priya adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "Maya told me things. She was scared. She said Arjun was becoming controlling. He didn't want her speaking to other men, even casually. She wanted to end things, but she was afraid of what he might do." The courtroom went silent, the words hanging heavy in the air. Priya continued, her voice gaining strength. "On the night she disappeared, she called me. She said Arjun insisted they meet at the hotel. She was nervous, but she didn't want to fight anymore. She told me if I didn't hear from her by morning, something might have happened." Gasps echoed across the room. This was no longer about assumptions. It was Maya's own words, spoken to a trusted friend, predicting her fate. The defense scrambled. Arjun's lawyer objected, questioning why Priya hadn't come forward earlier. Priya explained through tears, "I was scared too. I thought no one would believe me. But when I saw Arjun denying everything, I couldn't stay quiet." The judge allowed her testimony to stand. Arjun's eyes burned with fury, and for the first time, his mask slipped entirely. He slammed his palm on the table and shouted, "She was lying to you! She betrayed me!" His outburst shocked the courtroom, forcing the bailiffs to restrain him. The jury watched closely, his violent temper now exposed before them. Rizwan, on the other hand, shrank into his chair, avoiding Arjun's glare. The partnership between them was clearly breaking apart under the weight of the trial. After court adjourned that day, Inspector Samir sat in his office reflecting on Priya's words. Her testimony had changed everything, but it also opened new questions. Why had Maya gone to the hotel despite her fear? Did she trust that Arjun would calm down? Or had someone else convinced her? Late that night, Samir received a call from the forensic lab. They had re-examined the bag Rizwan carried into the hotel. Inside, they had found fibers from rope and traces of sedatives. This wasn't just a crime of passion anymore. It was a carefully orchestrated trap. As he hung up the phone, Samir realized the story wasn't finished unraveling. Priya's testimony had opened a new door, and behind it there might be secrets darker than anyone had yet imagined. The next morning, the courtroom was charged with tension before the proceedings even began. Reporters crowded the entrance, their cameras flashing as Arjun and Rizwan were escorted inside. The headlines from the previous day had already set the town ablaze. Friend reveals Maya's final call. Arjun loses temper in court, and case tilts against millionaire's son. Inside, Inspector Samir Jatavan reviewed the new forensic report again. The rope fibers and sedative traces from Rizwan's bag were a turning point. It was no longer just about obsession. It was premeditation, planned down to the smallest detail. The prosecution began the day with the lab technician on the stand. Calmly, he described the chemical analysis. We identified benzodiazepine residue in the cloth fragments. This sedative is often used to incapacitate victims. His words cut through the silence like a blade. The implication was clear. Maya hadn't just been overpowered, she had been drugged. The jury leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Arjun and Rizwan. Both men sat rigid, but their expressions told different stories. Arjun's anger simmered just beneath the surface, while Rizwan's fear was becoming more and more visible. When Rizwan was called to testify again, he hesitated. His lawyer whispered urgently, urging him to stick to the original story, but Rizwan's face was pale, his voice shaky. I didn't know about the drugs. That was Arjun's plan. I only carried the bag because he told me to. I didn't know what was inside. The prosecutor pounced. So you admit you were there from the start. You admit you accompanied him willingly. Rizwan swallowed hard. Yes, but I never wanted this. I thought he just wanted to scare her. I didn't know he would. His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, others whispered. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Rizwan had shifted the weight of blame directly onto Arjun. Arjun, however, refused to stay silent. He stood up abruptly, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures. He's lying! He was with me every step of the way. He tied the knots. He helped move her. Don't you dare believe him. The gallery buzzed with shock. For the first time, the two accused of killing Maya were openly turning on each other. Inspector Samir, observing from the benches, felt the tension tighten around the room. This was the moment he had been waiting for. When criminals start blaming one another, the truth begins to spill out piece by piece. But even as Arjun and Rizwan's alliance shattered before everyone's eyes, Samir couldn't shake a thought gnawing at him. The sedatives, the ropes, the planning, it all felt too elaborate for Arjun alone. Was there another player in this story? Someone who had taught him how to cover his tracks? That evening, back at the station, Samir requested a deeper dive into Arjun's financial records. If there was another player in this story, the money trail might be the only way to uncover them. And when the first set of bank statements landed on his desk, his suspicion grew. There were transfers, unusual amounts, sent to an account under a false name. Transactions that coincided exactly with the days leading up to Maya's disappearance. It was no longer just about a jealous lover and his accomplice. There was another shadow in this story. Someone who had yet to be unmasked.
Inspector Samir spent the night poring over Arjun's financial records. The more he traced the transactions, the clearer the picture became. These weren't random payments. They were structured, deliberate, and all routed to a single shadow account. Whoever controlled it wasn't just involved, they were pulling strings from the very beginning. The breakthrough came when Sameer's tech team cracked the alias behind the account. The name was shocking. Rafiq Siddiqui, a private investigator who had once worked for Arjun's wealthy family. He wasn't just any investigator. He specialized in surveillance, cover-ups, and digging into secrets people wanted buried. Sameer leaned back in his chair, piecing it together. Arjun had money, Rizwan had blind devotion, but Rafiq had the brains. It was Rafiq who taught Arjun how to buy sedatives under the radar, how to erase CCTV footage, and how to plan diversions to delay suspicion. This was why the case had felt unusually complicated. There was a professional hand guiding it. The next day in court, Sameer revealed the discovery. The judge allowed the prosecution to call Rafiq as a surprise witness. The man walked in calmly, wearing a neatly pressed suit, his face unreadable. "Mr. Siddiqui," the prosecutor began, "did you receive money from Arjun Malhotra in the weeks before Maya's disappearance?" "Yes," Rafiq replied flatly, "but I wasn't paid for what you think." The courtroom tensed. Sameer's eyes narrowed. "Then tell us, what were you paid for?" Rafiq's lips curved into a faint smile. "To protect Arjun, to clean up his messes. He was reckless, always has been. But this time," his voice trailed off, "this time it went too far." The prosecutor pressed harder. "Did you advise him on how to restrain Maya? Did you provide the sedatives?" Rafiq hesitated. For the first time, his calm exterior cracked. "I told him how such things are usually done, but I never thought he'd actually carry it out. He was obsessed, out of control. I warned him." Gasps rippled through the room. Arjun slammed his fists on the table. "He's lying. It was he who told me what to do. He gave me the drugs. He told me how to cover it up." Rafiq's eyes flickered, but he didn't deny it. The judge called for silence as the tension spiraled. Now it wasn't just Arjun versus Rizwan. A third figure had entered the battlefield, muddying the waters further. Inspector Sameer scribbled notes quickly. The case was evolving, but one thing was certain. Maya's death was not the result of a single man's rage. It was a chain of greed, obsession, and manipulation. And as the trial neared its final stages, Sameer knew the biggest revelation was still to come.
The courtroom was electric. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and every spectator leaned forward as if the very walls were holding their breath. Arjun sat pale and trembling, his once confident demeanor reduced to frantic outbursts. Rizwan avoided his eyes, staring at the ground, consumed by betrayal. And Rafiq, the supposed mastermind, maintained his unsettling calm, as though he had planned for this day all along. Inspector Sameer rose, his voice steady. "My lord, this case was never about a simple domestic dispute. It was about control, about power, and about the way greed can twist the human heart. Maya's death was not an accident, not a moment of anger. It was carefully designed." He paused, letting the silence hang. Then he held up a final piece of evidence, a tiny black notebook recovered from Rafiq's office. The entries matched Arjun's financial transfers, but in the margins were chilling notes: tested dosage, surveillance angle, disposal timeline. The courtroom erupted. Even the judge's face hardened. "Mr. Siddiqui, how do you explain this?" Rafiq finally smirked, leaning into the microphone. "Because, Your Honor, I document everything. That's why people hire me. But Arjun was weak. He didn't have the stomach to carry it through without me." Arjun jumped to his feet. "Lies! You promised me she would just disappear. You said no one would ever find out." His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want her dead. I just wanted her gone." The judge slammed his gavel for order. The truth was undeniable now. Arjun had plotted it, Rizwan had enabled it, and Rafiq had orchestrated it. Together, they had destroyed an innocent woman's life. When the verdict was read, the courtroom seemed frozen in time. Arjun Malhotra, guilty of conspiracy and murder. Rizwan Khan, guilty of aiding and abetting. Rafiq Siddiqui, guilty of premeditated murder and criminal facilitation.
As the guards led the men away in handcuffs, Samir looked at Maya's family seated in the gallery. Their grief would never vanish, but justice, at least in its imperfect human form, had been served. Walking out of the courthouse, Samir thought about the case. It wasn't just about crime. It was about how far obsession could push people, how greed could blind loyalty, and how manipulation could turn friends into enemies. And as he faced the flashing cameras outside, he spoke clearly for the record. This case reminds us all, evil does not always wear a mask. Sometimes it hides in the people closest to us, in the faces we trust most. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Crime Codex for more true crime documentaries that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, trust is sometimes the deadliest weapon of all.